All right, gang, and welcome back. So we're now working on the background of this thing. We've got some of it laid out. Now let's go ahead and darken it up a little bit, right? Because in reality, space is dark. So let's go ahead and add a new layer. And I'm going to drag it down between the nebula layer we've got and that background. Now, what I'm going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and switch over brushes. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my soft brush. And I'm going to go straight up black with this. I'm going to turn the opacity up. I'm going to turn this side up a little bit. Now let's go ahead and make it a little bit darker here. Okay, now you see here we're not going all the way dark in a lot of places. And then there are some places where we're going to want to make it pretty dark. Okay. Now in order to do this part, we're also going to have to come up into this area here. So now I'm onto this nebula layer. And let's go ahead and drop the opacity down a little bit and temper that down a little bit. There we go, making it happen. Okay, so I think we're in pretty good shape there. That's looking a lot darker. Let's go ahead and crank that up, crank that down, and let's kind of hit in some of these areas. Okay, now, same nebula brush we used. Let's go ahead and do it again, folks. Hit the nebula. Crank up the opacity a little bit. Oh. Okay. Add in some of that. Now, let's go ahead here and let's do a little bit with blues, right? Because there's a lot of blues. So let's go ahead and make it a dark blue. And let's go ahead and keep it on that layer. And let's try another brush texture here. Let's go ahead here and, oh, I don't know. Let's take a look at, let's go with our spray paints, right? And let's go ahead now and grab this medium nozzle. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna crank that bad boy up and keep the opacity low until we see exactly what it's doing to us here. And you see we're just using this in a little bit of these areas here to get kind of a bluish look. Okay. So now what we're going to do is I still want a little bit more dark here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and switch this layer over to multiply. I'm creating a new layer. I'm just not happy with how light this is. So I could do a hue saturation adjustment on this, but I'm not quite ready yet. So let's go ahead and grab our airbrush, grab our soft brush, and let's go ahead and grab some dark. Let's drop the opacity a little bit. And let's just take this in. Let's go ahead and open this up just a little bit. And now we're going to target a couple areas. Oh, that looks really nice. I love what it did to the luminance there. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and bring this up a little bit more. Put in a little bit more blue. All right, looking pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Now, let me show you something else here. We're going to go up to here. We're going to bring this layer up. And now this is kind of a really cool technique. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab our brush, and I'm actually going to use the Oriental brush. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go pretty white on this. Okay. Now, watch what happens. We're going to go ahead and crank this bad boy up to a fairly large amount. We're going to keep the opacity at about 3/4. Now, watch what we're doing here. We start. Now, if we don't like that, I'm going to go ahead and undo that, and I'm going to drop my size just slightly. I'm going to increase the opacity just a little. And you see what it's creating. It's kind of creating this nebulous galaxy here. I can go a little bit larger, a little bit more opaque. A lot of it's trial and error here. less opaque. Again, it's not an exact science, man. Sometimes you just try some stuff. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so I kind of like that. Now, let's play with the... Ooh, let's move it over so we can see what we're doing with it. Let's play with the blend mode a little bit. Now, we're going to try to really contrast this bad boy. Let's see what happens there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to swap over this layer a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do an HSL adjustment. Now, I'm going to come up over here, and we're going to make it a little bit lighter. All right, and then let's place it under here now. Let's go ahead and bring that guy underneath all those layers. There we go. All right, and I'm happy with that. So now, one of the last things we want to do here, we can touch this thing up just a little bit further. We're now going to do a freehand selection. And now, what we're going to do, let's go ahead and add in a little bit of underlighting, because this underside of the ship is going to be lit up differently. So let's go ahead and grab our rocket. Open layers. All right, we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the base rocket. There we go. Oops. All right, so now with the rocket ungrouped, we're now going to grab the blue rocket layer. We're going to grab our selection tool. Now, what I'm trying to do here is I'm going to lighten up this area of the rocket because it's taking on some of the shadow, let's say, or some of the lightness from the afterburn. So we go through and we select this area. And now with this selected, let's go ahead and do a little bit of modification. We're going to come over here. We're going to grab this yellow. I'm going to grab kind of a whitish yellow. We're going to crank this opacity down. And we're going to grab the soft airbrush for this. And now you see how we're just kind of ever so slightly tweaking this thing? All right, now let's see what we got when we remove it. All right, now that looks a little bit too firm, right? So what we can do with this now, let's grab our smudge brush. We got the soft airbrush going on for the smudge. You can go ahead and smudge that out. And you're only working on the blue, so you're not really hurting anything. Now, you see how much that kind of adds in that reflected light to it? Now, let's go ahead and do the same thing now on the underside of the other fin. So, I'm still on my rocket layer. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to freehand select this area right here. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I've got my soft airbrush selected. Now, what I can do at this point, I can do a couple different things. I can either smudge it out, like we did before, which I think is probably the best option. Or we can go through, and I'll show you what to do on this next fin. We're going to go through, we're going to freehand select, and I'm grabbing this portion of my fin. Now what I'm going to do, just to show you how this works, I'm going to save this as a separate layer. Now watch what happens. I can take that layer, and now selecting only that layer, we're going to alpha lock it. Now why did we alpha lock it? So that I could actually draw on it without having it color everything else. See how I'm able to color it? Now, you see how there's that firm line? Watch this. I can apply a Gaussian blur, but only to that layer. You see there it kind of goes through and blurs it out for me? So that's another way you can do it. You can then select it as a layer and Gaussian blur it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to fade it out anyway because I like that effect. That to me is a better way to go. All right, so let's go ahead now and finish this bad boy up. We've got the reflected light there. We've got our spacing kind of figured out. I think we're in pretty good shape. The last thing that I really want to do is we can add a little bit of motion blur to this afterburn. So let's go over here, and I'm going to go ahead and combine these two rocket blaster layers. So I've just combined them. Now that's a destructive operation. I can't undo that. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to crank down the opacity on this just ever so slightly. And then with that layer selected, I'm going to use a perspective blur. On that layer. All right, good deal. So you can literally play around with this for hours and hours and hours. I think we're in pretty good shape there. I hope this has showed you kind of in this hour how you can go through with minimal skill and get maximum effect on your images using Procreate. All right, folks, I'd love to see what you got. Go ahead and post them up in the assignments immediately following this area. I'd love to see your screenshots of your rockets. All right, folks, we'll see you in the next lessons.